Romans readers, we are in chapter 3. We saw yesterday that Paul is challenging the whole Jewish paradigm of how the law functions. The law is not a shield to keep the wrath of God from off of you. The law instead says both Gentiles and Jews equally are going to face the wrath of God, because everyone is disobedient to King Jesus. Chapter 3 then, Paul's imagining a Jew is saying to him, then what advantage has the Jew? That is, what's the point, Paul? He's imagining a Jew is saying to him, why did God give us the law at all? If it is not to help us, why Moses? Why the Exodus? Why the 10 Commandments? If we're still going to face wrath, then what's the point, Paul? And moreover, Paul, what it seems as though is your gospel seems to suggest that we can do evil that good may come. First, the Jewish objector is essentially saying, well, Paul, if God gave us the law and it's not going to help us keep the wrath of God off, then what's the point? And secondly, apparently the law doesn't matter, so we can sin and God will still forgive. So to the Jew, you're not upholding the law, Paul, because apparently according to Paul's gospel, you don't need the law. There's apparently no point in doing right and wrong, so that we can do evil, and Jesus, this King Jesus, will still forgive us. So we could do evil that good may come. And then Paul says, as some people slanderously charge us with saying their condemnation is just. Verse 19. We know that whatever the law says, it speaks to those who are under the law, so that all may be held accountable to God. In Paul's new paradigm, the law is a judge and it's working just fine. He's not subverting the law. He's using the law as it was supposed to be used. All these verses here are quotations from the Old Testament to show the Jews, look, your own book said this. Your own book said that no one understands. No one seeks God. No one does good, not even one. Their throat is an open grave. Paul's bringing out these voices and these verses to say, of course you're under the wrath of God. Look what your own book says. Your own book says you're in danger. So I'm not subverting the law. I'm not saying the law doesn't function. I'm saying the law is working just fine. It's to hold you accountable to God. Paul's paradigm then is to suggest that the law, the purpose of it is to drive you to God, to drive you to dependence on God. There's another problem though. In the Old Testament, there is promise after promise that the God of the Old Testament, the God of the Jews, the God of Israel is going to save his people. Now, if they are under wrath, if no one does good, not even one, if they're under wrath, then apparently God's not going to come through on all these promises. To the Jew, the law seemed to be a sign suggesting that that is the sign that God's wrath won't fall on them. Paul's saying that's not the purpose of the law. And then the Jews coming back, well, Paul, God said he was going to save us from the wrath. So the law isn't doing it. So what is? Imagine I had told my kids, year after year, we're going to Disneyland, and we never go. Well, eventually they're just going to think I'm a liar. And they're not going to think that I have very honest character. That's what the Jews are suggesting about Paul's gospel, is that his gospel suggests God's not coming through on his promises. So Paul's got to defend his gospel from that charge. The righteousness of God has been manifested. If God kept promising Disneyland and he never showed up, then he's not righteous. If God promised he's going to save people from the wrath, and apparently the law is not going to do that, well, then God seems like he's unrighteous. And Paul says, no, hold on. God is righteous, and the righteousness of God has been manifested apart from the law. Although the law and prophets bear witness to it, the law is pointing to the way that the righteousness of God is going to be fulfilled. He says it again. The gospel is to show the righteousness of God. The gospel is to show the righteousness of God. And how? The righteousness of God is through faith in Jesus Christ. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. Both Jews and Gentiles then are being pushed towards Jesus Christ. the king, obedience to him. So the Jews could then say to Paul, it seems like you're overthrowing the law by this faith. Seems like we don't have the law. And Paul saying, no. Do we overthrow the law then by this faith? By no means. On the contrary, we uphold the law. We uphold the law as it was originally designed to function, as a witness. Although the law and prophets bear witness to Jesus Christ, the law and prophets point to Jesus. The law is not an end in itself. It's a pointer to Jesus Christ. And that's how Paul sees the function of the law. So he doesn't overthrow the law. He uses it as it's originally intended. He upholds the law. Romans chapter 4 tomorrow. See you then.